Welcome into the Blurred Wire. Today, we have a very, very special movie that we're talking about. We're going to talk about Quiet Place Part 2. Currently, A Quiet Place, a day one is in theaters, and it is smashing through theaters. Like having one of the best weekend openings of the entire year for any movie. I think it's already made back its budget. But before we go in too deep, say hello to the people, Ty. How you doing? How's life been?
Hello, the people. I'm doing quite well, thank you. Um, Wish I was more excited for this than
For A
than I
Quiet
than I
Place
am.
Part 2?
Which we'll delve into it, but
We'll talk a little bit more about it. So Quiet Place
mhm,
was definitely the one that's like that's your one.
the first
That's the
one.
one. That's the defining moment.
I just
Um,
hmm
Let me look at I just want to see how much has A Quiet Place day one grossed so far. Yeah, budget of 67 million. It's already at almost 200 million. So
good
it is
for
doing
good for it, man.
fantastic. Yeah, I know. I'm very happy for it. It's so I see it's yeah, it debuted at about 50 million and while competing with Inside Out 2, which has already grossed over $1 billion. So it is the summer box office resurgence has really began. I recently got a chance to go see Bad Boys Ride or Die. Um
Mhm.
it was funny. I see why it did so well at the box office because it was pretty funny and it had some good action in it. It had some good, I love Will Smith. I'll always follow in anything he does. He's one of my favorite entertainers of all time.
Mhm.
Um, but that movie was funny. It was a pretty good movie. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about A Quiet Place Part 2, taking it all the way back. When did this movie come out? 2021?
2020,
2020. Okay.
I
Because I thought it
believe.
got pushed back because of COVID. Um, from its like theatrical release date
Oh,
after the
everything I can
pandemic.
see online states it as a 2020 release,
Okay.
but I don't remember
Oh,
exactly.
so it came out in March in New York City, but it didn't get released throughout the entire United States until May. So like it premiered in March, but then the pandemic hit and then everything shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it was theatrically released a year later, and then it became available to stream. But so Quiet
Gotcha.
Place, day one. I'm probably actually gonna go watch it again pretty soon here. Um, Like out of the two, this one is my favorite. And I
Hmm.
know I'm very much so in the majority, not majority, minority, because most people kind of preferred um A Quiet Place day one. I mean, A Quiet
Hmm.
Place like the first one in 2018.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's partly due to I think we talked about it a little bit. I think it's like because this one feels like it moves a little bit further away from the horror genre and moves more to like the suspense thriller genre. Like we see the creatures. The film is even this movie is mostly shot during the day. It's not really at nighttime as much. Like the first
Hmm.
one was very dark. Most of it took place at night. Most of it happened. This one, it feels like much more of a suspense thriller because
Hmm.
it's shot during the day. There's a lot of light. You can clearly see the creatures. And it feels just more like a monster, like kind of just like a classic monster movie almost. Like it reminds me a lot of Jurassic Park, honestly.
Hmm.
Like the way the creatures would like tear apart people or like tear people away from the screen or like leap
Hmm.
out onto people like velociraptors and stuff. So
Hmm.
I think that's why I ended up because like again, overall, I'm not really a horror fan. So like and like I think this is still like classifies as a horror movie, but if I was watching this, I would not think this is a like especially this one, part two. I would
Hmm.
not think it's a horror movie. I would say it's like a suspense
A
thriller
thriller.
movie if I was watching it and didn't like if I hadn't seen the first one and if I didn't know like what genre it kind of is,
Hmm.
I kind of would have classified it that way. And like one of my favorite scenes is at the beginning when the creatures when it shows them at the basketball game, baseball game when the creatures first
Hmm.
come down because it was so sudden and everything. Um and one of my other favorite scenes was when the girl was finally standing up to the creatures. Um, I don't know why I can't remember her name. Sorry, let me get it. Reagan, the deaf daughter, when she finally
Mm-hmm.
got to broadcast that signal over the speakers and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she like, stood up to that creature. It felt like it was a very big like moment for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this movie still maintains the family theme, even though they lost John Krasinski in the first one. He
Mm-hmm.
appears at the beginning, and he still directed it, but because they're still together, it still feels like a family movie. It still
Mm-hmm.
feels like that. Cillian Murphy had an incredible performance. I think that's one of the reasons why I liked it too, because his performance as Emmett was stellar. I mean, we already know he's one of the best actors out there right now, but
Mm-hmm.
um, and then Djimon Hounsou was kind of a more of a forgettable performance. It wasn't really as I felt like he was just there to kind of get killed. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what
At the
happened.
very end.
Yeah, like he maybe had like 5 minutes of screen time, if that.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't really get a chance to show off, but I'm excited because he's in day one too. So I'm excited to see if they give him a little bit more to do with his talent. But so those are my like initial thoughts about Quiet Place Day
Mm-hmm.
part two. So how did you feel about this movie?
It is everything I didn't like. It took away everything I enjoyed about the first movie. Like there was a reason I had forgotten about this movie, and it's because like not to get like too intense, but it's everything I hate in a sequel. Like it took the things that made the first one special, and it feels like just a cash grab. Like it feels like, oh, this Quiet Place was such a success. Let's do it up. Let's do it up with like a real budget. Like let's just add to it. Let's add more people. Let's show the monsters more. Let's add more tension. The characters, I feel like we learned nothing. Any arcs anyone went on, it felt like we went through the exact same arc as we had in the first movie, which like, canonically it takes place like an hour or two after the end of the
After.
first.
Hmm.
It picks up immediately after. There's no tension. It doesn't feel isolated. It doesn't feel as creative or unique. Like it turned a really cool concept into a cash grab. And I hate that. I think the movie itself is just boring. Like on the whole, like despite having more action, I felt nothing. Like this is to me, this is a I will forget about this movie tomorrow. Like
So
I
funny.
do not like this movie at all. And I like it I hate it more because it came after a movie that was so much more interesting and engaging. Like it's got scenes that feel like we're built for tension, but I didn't feel any of it because it felt all manufactured.
Yeah, I would definitely say it definitely didn't build on the tension and suspense. It just kind of was like, so all that you got in the first movie should be enough to carry you through this one. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not really expanding more on that. I think the only thing I didn't like necessarily was having a whole colony of people. Because while that
Mm-hmm.
scene was very interesting, I think you're right. It does kind of feel like, I mean, each movie has gotten bigger. I mean, we've only had two movies, so it's kind of hard for me to say like each one has gotten bigger, but it feels like they maybe went too big too fast.
Too fast.
Like maybe if you introduced another family that was trying to survive,
Mm-hmm.
that could have worked,
Which you
kind of
do.
kept it from, and that's what Cillian Murphy's
Yeah, you get that a
character.
little bit with
Yeah.
Emmett,
Yeah, with
but
Emmett, exactly. But by introducing a whole colony of people that are
Mhm.
living away from, it kind of makes it feel, like you said, it kind of gives it that cash grabby, let's blow it up and like try to appeal to more people aspect. So like I can
And
get that.
those like marauder, like those bandit, like diseased, like raider people that like at the docks that like show up and then get killed by all the monsters. They're like barely in the movie, but they're there.
I think I totally forgot about that scene because I
It's
have
this
no idea what you're talking about.
but you see what I mean? Like the scenes that feel like they're bigger, because in that scene Cillian Murphy does the thing where like he's screaming and he's holding the guy like at the end of the dock, and then he jumps off and then the monster gets the guy. Like it, like I'm describing it and it sounds like it should be connecting in my brain as like, whoa, that's a cool tense scene. Watching it I feel nothing. Like I literally feel nothing. It's like how you talk about animals. You know how you always say like, for our listeners, this is, you get some Will lore on this. But Will always says when he talks about animals, he tells people, "How do you feel about a piece of paper?" And they're always like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Exactly. That's how I feel about them. Like nothing. That's how I feel
Oh
about
my
A Quiet
God.
Place Part Two."
Yeah, I'm not really a pet person. I've gotten some really horrified looks when I said that. And I think I feel like I have to tell the whole story. Long story short, I was at my job. Everyone was talking about their dogs. They were like, "Will, what about your pet?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't have a pet." They're like, "What do you mean you don't have a pet?" And I'm like, "I mean exactly what I said. You guys have a pet. I do not have one." And they
Mhm,
were like, "What? That's crazy. You're gonna get a pet. Like now that you're married, you're probably gonna get a pet." And I'm like, "No, I don't really see that happening." They're like, "Nah, you're gonna get a dog one day." And that's what I was like. You know how you feel when you look at a piece of paper?
mhm,
And they're like, "What?" And I was like, "That's how I feel when I look at dogs."
mhm.
Because I was like, I'm not gonna get a pet. So anyway, so
Will is not anti-animal. I want to
I am
make
not.
that clear. He
Yes,
doesn't
like
hate animals. It's just them existing alongside of him in a house.
I just do not feel a strong connection to them.
No, not at
Or
all.
yeah.
Or
So
Eddie.
or okay. So anyway, moving on. Yeah, I see. I think I must have just. I'm starting to remember that scene a little bit now.
Mhm.
Um, and it definitely was not one of the better parts of the movie. Um, And I think so. Do you feel like it's partly because it moved away from the horror genre that like made you, or is it more just like the aspects of like going bigger? Because some of the things you kind of described, like lessening the tension, it feels like it kind of converted to another genre. Um, because
On
I feel like a lot of the horror elements it pretty much removed in this one, which of course for someone who's not a horror fan, it'll make the movie seem better because they just like it more because they just connect with it more. But like, do you feel like it's more just like the writing and everything else into it?
So it has nothing to do with the genre part.
Okay.
I preferred it when it was more horror than it was when it wasn't as like tense action.
Mm,
Everything for me comes down to, and this is a tricky part when it comes to making a sequel. I feel like every
yeah.
sequel should have a good answer to the question, why does this exist? Why did we need to tell another story here? Was it that it completes something that was set up in the first? Was it while creating the first, they thought of a different angle or a different perspective that could be interesting to look at? Quiet Place Part Two has, to me, no answer to that question. And the emotional ties it tries to lean back on, to hit those like family movie moments, feel like they're just rehashing things that we had just gone over in the first movie. And the fact that this takes place like like literally hours after the first is the beginning of this movie. It feels like there's been no time to grow, no room to grow, nothing. This movie makes no attempt at trying to find its own identity in that sense. It feels like it's just trying to almost remake the first one, just in like a slightly different genre, but also make it a sequel. And to
Hmm.
me, that feels like such a shame because it just feels like a movie made from executives, not from a place of creative intent. Whereas the first one felt like it was, we have this really cool idea. Let's try to make it a reality. Whereas this felt like, oh, shoot, A Quiet Place Part One made a lot of, or A Quiet Place made a lot of money, let's do that again for like the low budget that it had.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's where, like, make it less horror. That part doesn't bother me at all because I'll get down with a movie no matter what genre it
Genre
is.
it is. Yeah.
If I feel like the strong creative passion from it, I felt zero creative passion in this movie.
Well, like
and
we
it
said,
makes me sad.
yeah, and like you said, horror kind of exists on a spectrum, and I feel
Yeah,
like even the first movie itself was kind of teetering on the edge of that spectrum.
it's very
And this
light,
one,
very light. Yeah.
yeah, and this one, like I don't even know if you can like say it's horror. Um,
Mhm.
but I kind of because like the end of the first movie, I was thinking I think it's also because like I knew there was going to be a sequel when I was
Mhm.
watching it. So like when I got to the end of the first movie, like I watched them back to back. I was immediately thinking, okay, she's going to see how can she use this feedback thing
Mhm.
to help them, beat the monsters. Because it's
Mhm.
like the first movie, the whole objective was to survive. That was
Mhm.
it. Just live. That's
Mhm.
it. That was the entire subjective. We are just trying to live. I'm also pregnant, but we are just trying to live.
Mhm.
There wasn't any overall, there wasn't any overall like objective besides just living. I mean, that's pretty much what it was, just survive.
Mhm.
And so in this movie, the entire objective is to get this earpiece to others, like to use it to try to help people defeat the monsters. So
Mhm.
it kind of goes to like a wrap up. It kind of goes to like a wrap up storyline almost, like where you kind of
Mhm.
got to turn the tide against the monsters. Um,
Mhm.
because again, the first one didn't have any kind of like they just survived. That was it. You know what I mean? So like it feels like if they were going to make a second one and keep going, it's like do you can't really do like the our only objective is to survive all over again
Mhm.
because I mean, you just did that, and now it's like, okay, well, we survived. So now what? Hey, well, we survived because of this earpiece. Let's see if we can use it to help other people or get it
Mhm.
further. So, like I said, I think it
Mhm.
would have been better if maybe Emmett and his daughter survived or something like that. And they get the
Mhm.
interesting perspective of trying to survive with another family while trying to figure out what to do with the earpiece.
Right.
Because I definitely think some of the elements, like the colony, it did feel sometimes movies can feel like they go too big on the sequels too
Mhm.
fast. I think and you're right, it's really hard to make sequels. It is extremely
Mhm.
hard to make sequels when you have a really good first movie.
Mhm.
Because and like I feel like
Especially when it's not planned out. Like, because
yeah,
this was not a planned sequel. This came
I
after the
think you can tell
success.
that too. I think you can tell
Mhm.
that too. Like because I knew there was a sequel coming, I knew what storyline they were going to pick up, but it
Mhm.
also kind of feels like a story that very much so lends itself to one and done. Like
Mhm.
that's kind of it. And I can think of a couple of other movies that like I feel like superhero genre movies almost always lend themselves a lot more to sequels, partially because the comic book lore is so extensive. So you have a lot you can go off of. Um, and also
Mhm.
because you can save if you usually are planning for it, so you can save your most interesting story for the second one. That's why The Dark Knight was so good compared to Batman Begins because Christopher Nolan's like, I'm gonna save my interesting Joker storyline for the second one. Captain America,
Mhm.
Winter Soldier. I'm gonna save my most interesting storyline for the second one. Winter
Mhm.
Soldier, Hydra. So it's like because you can do that because you know you're gonna get a sequel and it's going to you can continue building. And again, you have all this lore to back you up. Because like when you think about movies that have like fantastic sequels or movies that end up having movies or trilogies that end up getting better, because there's very few of them
Mhm.
that do. Most of them I feel like the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh, Captain America. And it's like, oh, well, that's
Mhm.
in the superhero genre. Is there anything
Mhm.
outside of that? And it's like, kind of Star Wars, the original trilogy,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
think there's a consensus that Empire is better than A
yeah.
New Hope.
But a lot of people say Return of the Jedi was worse than both of them. That one's
Mhm.
you'll get differing opinions on that one. But yeah, most people say Empire Strikes Back is one of the best sequels of all time. I mean, right now,
Mhm.
Dune Part Two is, best sequel of all time in that category.
Mhm.
But there's very few movies outside of that that had such. And again, you have to start with the stellar movie to begin with. Like Captain
Mhm.
America, the First Avenger, and Batman Begins. They were solid movies, but they weren't amazing. They weren't they weren't as good as A Quiet Place, I would say.
Mhm.
Uh, and like one sequel that absolutely destroyed me was Kingsman: The Golden Circle.
Mhm.
I was so angry at that movie. Like literally anger. Like I was steaming because the first one, Kingsman: The Secret Service, is so good. It's
Hmm.
so good.
Hmm.
It's hilarious. It has a good plot, it has motivation, character growth, and it's hilarious. In case I didn't mention that already. And it feels like everything that went well with the first one, and it's directed by the same guy. So I don't know what went wrong in Matthew Vaughn's head. Is written by the same one, but it's like they
Hmm.
took, I think, like the way you feel about this movie is the way I feel about that one. They took
Hmm.
everything that was good about Kingsman and just kind of reversed it and
Yeah.
just completely went in an opposite direction. They tried to go too big. They wanted to bring in all these big name actors like Channing Tatum and Halle Berry and Jeff Bridges. So that way they could, so they introduced a whole nother American division of Kingsmen. And it's
Did they
probably
really?
like got, oh yeah, it
I'm
was
not sure if
horrible.
I ever saw part two. I saw the first one and I enjoyed the first Kingsman a lot.
And the
But
first one was fantastic.
mm,
And like you said, with Samuel L. Jackson,
yeah.
Sophia Boutella, and it's like they did so many things. Like at the beginning of the storyline, this character Julie, who's played by Julianne Moore. Again, they're just trying to bring in all these big name actors, and she has this weird thing where she like controls all the drugs in the world, and then she like sends a missile. Like one of the most interesting characters from Kingsman was Roxy. Like she was a
Hmm.
great character. And it was interesting to see her and Eggsy become like the Kingsman because he had to take over for his mentor. Like at the beginning, they were gunning for the same spot. She ended up getting it because she shot the blank at the dog and Eggsy didn't, right?
Hmm.
And and then he ended up having to take the place of his mentor because he got killed by Samuel L. Jackson's character. And it was a
Hmm.
really cool, like full circle moment. And then it was like, oh, cool. This will be interesting to see how they work together in the beginning. And
Hmm.
instead, they killed her like within 15 minutes of the movie. She
Hmm.
dies. And they had him and Merlin go on like this drunken adventure where they end up finding the statesman. They find the statesman because they get drunk and it's at the bottom of a bottle. And then for some reason, they bring Harry back from the dead from the first movie after he gets shot in the face by Samuel L. Jackson. It was like everything wrong you just did. Like, no, we need to
Hmm.
see more of Roxy's story. We need to see more of her growth. Harry's story is done. Like, it was
Hmm.
sad that he died, but we don't need to bring him back. Like, he died for a reason. He made
Right.
Eggsy the man he is today. Don't reverse.
Right.
And then they had Pedro Pascal's character like betray them. It was
Pedro
such a
Pascal was
hot
in
mess.
it.
Yes. Yes. And it was not a great performance. It was weird. The whole movie, they brought back like from the first like 10 minutes of watching it, I was like, what did they do to my Kingsman? Like I felt I felt personally attacked. And I'm surprised that the reviews on it weren't as bad either. Like most of them were just kind of like, oh, it's not as good as the first one. And I was like, this is the worst movie, one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But anyway, sorry. So going all the way back to the movie we're actually talking about, Quiet Place Part 2. Uh
Yeah.
I just had to go about it because I like what you said about sequels, and how tough it can be. And it's like, yeah, when you think about the
To make
landscape,
a.
it's like there's not really that many great sequels. And to me, I think this one just appeals to me because the things that I the things I liked about the first one, it expanded on.
Hmm.
So
So
like
yeah, speak more. I want to hear you speak more on that. Like, tell me more about the things that really worked for you.
I mean, the first one, I liked the action. There wasn't a whole lot in
Hmm.
it, but I
Hmm.
liked it and it built it up. And then the second one expanded on it. And so
Hmm.
that's partly why I think the second one doesn't really work without the first one. Like I think you still need the first one. I think I still like if the first one had been just like the second one, I don't think I would feel this way. You know what I mean? Like if the
Hmm.
first one had as much action as the second one, I don't think I would feel this way. I think it's
Hmm.
because the first one I felt I felt like the characters were developed enough and I care about them enough that I can
Hmm.
watch a movie that focuses more on the action and what's happening rather than their growth. Because I feel like by the end of the movie, I feel like, we got to see him
Hmm.
forgive her for what happened to their youngest son, and
Hmm.
that allowed her to forgive herself. And I feel
Hmm.
like I could see that in that movie. And I feel like I could kind of see that in this one as well, and the actions that she takes, the deaf daughter is not carrying around this baggage of I got my brother killed. I feel like she was
Hmm.
able to let that go at the end of the first one, and because of that we now see her being able to, okay, I can do something so that way his death isn't in vain. I can help, get this out so that way people can stop being, so that more people won't be killed by these monsters, so that we can
Hmm.
fight back. Basically, I couldn't even think of the word. um
Right.
so I guess that's
So like the
what.
first movie did all of the heavy lifting for
Yeah,
the character growth so that it could make way for a more thrilling adventure in the sequel.
exactly.
Okay.
Like I don't feel like I'm missing anything from the characters. I agree there's not much character growth, there's not much development, but that's because I came away from the first one feeling like they are fully developed. I came away from
Mm.
the first one being like, I know these characters, and now I'm ready to see them succeed. I'm ready to see them thrive rather than just survive. And so
Hmm.
that's why I feel like they do kind of go hand in hand. Like you can't really have, like if I saw this one and didn't see the first one, I would be like, why do I care about these people? You know what I mean? Like, I agree
Right.
that character growth isn't really there. And I think that's just because, and I think it still appeals to me because I feel like it was done so well in the first one. Like, I'm
Hmm.
sure there's somewhere else you could have taken their characters to grow them more, but like, I couldn't have come up with it. Like, I couldn't even
Hmm.
think of where else do you take these characters to grow? Because to me, I was like, I think they covered most of it in the first one. There's not as much growth around the boy, I would say. Like, I feel like the story more centers around Reagan. I'm gonna stop
Yeah.
calling
I'm
call her
I'm
by her
trying to
name.
think his name.
Marcus. Yeah,
Market.
Marcus.
Okay.
Marcus, played by Noah Jupp or Jupe. I don't know how to say his last name.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's just not as much around him. So I guess it's one thing, like, they could have, because they didn't really develop him a whole lot in that one. He's just kind of one of the kids.
Hmm.
And so this one maybe kind of suffered from that. But again, to me, it was the performance of Millicent Simmons as Reagan that
Yeah.
took this to the next. Like to me, she's the standout in this movie with
Yeah.
everybody, even next to Cillian Murphy, next to Emily Blunt. She is the best actress in this movie, if you ask me,
Yeah.
actor or
I
actress.
agree with you there. Like she really shines. She is easily my favorite part about this movie, and I
Hmm.
think she did a really good job at reprising her role.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's different. I think that's just where we differ on this one. Cause like you said, how you like the character growth and development. And I enjoyed that in the first one too. And I
Hmm.
feel like that's why I didn't need it as much when I saw the second one, partially because it's back to back. But I wasn't thinking, like when I started this one, I wasn't thinking like, okay, how is she gonna grow more as a character? Or if I was thinking like, okay, how are they gonna stop these things? How are they gonna get this earpiece to where it needs to go so that way they can weaponize it against these things? So, because I definitely hear you. I definitely understand because it is taking a lot of that stuff out. Like there isn't much character development in this movie. Even Emmett's character, he's not really developed. He just kind of already is. Um,
Hmm.
and like you said, I do think they went a little too big, too fast. Like I said, I think there was no way they could have done a sequel and not introduced somebody. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't like redo this movie without John Krasinski's character and just have them surviving for a whole nother movie again. They had to introduce somebody, they had to introduce some other kind of perspective. Um, I just think the colony, because I think the third one is probably gonna go way bigger too, and it might end up
Hmm.
going to like globally. Which again can be tough, can be hard because it's when you see a movie like building, it's tough
Hmm.
because it's like that's not really what the first movie was.
Hmm.
Like when you compare it to the Kingdom of the Planet the Planet of the Apes movies, Dawn,
Hmm.
because we just did a lot of coverage on that. Dawn,
Hmm.
Rise, and War. Even though those movies do get bigger, they still feel smaller. And they
Hmm.
still feel in the same vein, same size. Because
Yeah.
like Rise is kind of what's happening in a city, and then Dawn is pretty much still in the city. It just kind of you just kind of hear about the repercussions around the world. And I really thought War for the Planet of the Apes, I thought it was going to be like a globe-trotting, action-packed thing of like wars and battles and all this stuff, but it's not. It's still very small comparatively and just in this compound. Um,
Hmm.
they just kind of talk about the global effects. And so I think and I think Quiet Place Day One, I don't know if it's supposed to be more based upon the trailers, it looks like it's more of a global, kind of
Yeah,
setting, which definitely is going way farther from just the, intimate family setting from the first ones. Um, but I definitely understand. Like if those were some of the things that you liked in the first one,
it's
um,
definitely not
it's
here.
not going to hit as hard for you, yeah, in the second one because they're not in it. They're missing. I
and
think it
and I
just
think too,
depends.
for it to be like very actiony, it doesn't go off the deep end to just like be pure action.
Hmm.
Like it's still like it has a lot of ties that try to make it a more family based movie that just make it feel generic. Like if you had gone off the deep end and made it just like a really schlocky, like cheesy kind of like action movie, I feel like I would have enjoyed it more because at
Oh,
least then
really?
it's like, yeah, okay, we did all of the development here. Now we just want to do something different and have
So you feel like they were
fun.
still trying to develop
It felt,
and didn't do it
yeah,
well? Okay.
yeah, I think so because like there's so many moments here that feel like they're just rehashing the first movie
Mm,
again.
okay.
And that's what makes it like so forgettable is like I thought I just watched this movie. I did. It was part 1. This is not a part 2. This is like Quiet Place, the requel, the remake sequel. Like that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that like you almost prefer like if it went more like just schlocky action because
Because
like
I
we're
could
already fully developed.
I mean, you know me, I will get down with just like mind numbing, just pure action schlock fests. I can do that and I
We saw
enjoy it.
Transformers. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
like I will get down with that, man. That's not just to me, that's not what this is.
hmm
But if I can make an interesting note, I looked it up because I was very curious. Because you had mentioned that you were in the minority for feeling that part 2 is you enjoyed it more. So again, this is just according to Rotten Tomatoes. I think this is an interesting metric. So
hmm
the first one had a 96% fresh on the critic end
hmm
and a 83% on the audience score. A Quiet Place Part 2 had a 91% on the critic end, but a 92 on the audience score.
Huh.
So according to just casual audience goer reviews,
They like
uh
this one more.
Quiet Place Part 2 was better received from audience members. Now, just to balance out, there is a larger discrepancy in the number. So, Quiet Place Part 1, the audience score had over 25,000 reviews. Part 2 only had over 5,000.
Oh, so it's a
So,
very sharp decrease in reviews.
so it is a, yeah.
Yeah.
So, perhaps, the
So maybe
first
the
one
people that
weeded
didn't,
out. Yeah,
yeah,
they
the
didn't
people
vibe
that
with the
didn't,
first one.
if they didn't like the second one, maybe they just didn't bother to review it at all. You know what I mean? Like, because like
Right,
out of those 25,000, 20,000 of them didn't come back to review the second one. And it
right.
could be because they didn't see it or just didn't enjoy it and decided not to leave a review. So that does kind of can skew it, but at least I know
But
there's at least 5,000 people out there that liked it more
But yeah, to
or
that
around
trend,
there.
I
Yeah.
I think the people that stuck with it the second time around, according to this trend, it felt like they enjoyed it the
They enjoyed,
second
yeah.
one. So
Okay.
I don't think you're in as much a minority as you may think on this
Okay.
stance.
Well,
At
that
least
feels
from
good
just a very
to,
basic uh overview on the internet. I just think that's fascinating how like each one is received. And I'm very curious once we give day one more time to
yeah.
like settle how that one will kind of sit because it's like a spin-off but
Yeah.
it's like capturing the same elements but in a different group of characters, a different story to tell. And so I wonder if that's going to make it more interesting to people. Is it going to hurt the perception?
That'll be very interesting to find out. Yeah. And I think, thank you, man. That it feels good to not be the minority or no, you not be so much of the minority, because I'm pretty used to that. Um, but yeah, I think I agree. So it'll be curious to see if, because John Krasinski still wants to do a third one. So it'll be very interesting to see if it goes like more schlocky action or if he tries to
Mhm.
recapture the magic of the first one. Because from where they're headed after the first one, like we're headed to a full-on war against these creatures. Like,
Mhm.
trying to take the earth back and basically solve the problem of the creatures.
Mhm.
So like, and like this one kind like one movie that's kind of similar to this is the Tomorrow War almost,
Mhm.
because it also involves like mind numbing like they use a lot of horror elements in that one to introduce the aliens. Like the Tomorrow War feels like these two movies like combined and like sped
Mhm.
up. Like John Krasinski basically took like the premise, and then he's gonna have like a build up, and then he's gonna have like a conclusion. And the Tomorrow War is like three of them combined, just schlocky action built through all through. Like how the first
Mhm.
movie was like them being hunted by these monsters, and like you felt that throughout the entire 90 minutes. The Tomorrow
Right.
War does it for about like 10 minutes in the movie. There's some scenes where you don't know what the creatures look like. You just see people
Mhm.
get killed out of randomly, and then you finally see them. And then once you see them, it's like all you see. Like you see them all over the place all the time. It completely like gets away from any surprise element or aspect, which is kind of what
Mhm.
this one did, because like since that first one, it showed them like a couple of times. In this one, you see them in the broad daylight, you see them all the time. There's no more mystery about what they look like, what they do, how sharp their teeth are, nothing, you know?
Right.
And then this one's like building towards a solution. And the Tomorrow War, like I said, by that point, and then by the end of it, it was getting to a solution where they could kill all the, they call them white spikes. Um, and like you said, it's not like, I think these movies are still much better. Like, please do not say that I'm trying to say that the Tomorrow War is just as good as A Quiet Place. If anybody's listening, like these movies are far superior to the Tomorrow War. I enjoyed it though because it was a lot of schlocky action, and
Mhm.
um, and I think that's so. I don't think he's going to end up going that route, because I think spreading it out over three movies makes the storyline like kind of fit. But
Mhm.
like even that one, like people are talking about making it a sequel because it did so well on Amazon Prime,
Mhm.
but it completely wrapped up its storyline like by
Yeah.
the end. Like I don't know what they would do for a sequel because they destroyed everything. So it's
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
if you make another sequel, it's literally just going to be an executive like, and I don't think, I mean, that one came out in 2022. So if they haven't done one by now, like most of the time, if it's an executive driven sequel, it's because it comes out within the next 2 or 3 years. And they're
Mhm.
like, we need to strike while it's hot. Let's go make another one and get it out.
Right.
So I guess that kind of just depends. But yeah, I mean, I overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, and again, I feel like I'm not necessarily saying that it's an improvement on the first one,
Mhm.
because I think what the first one does well, it does well. And what the second one does well, it does well. I think I just ended up enjoying, and I just ended up enjoying the second one a lot more because of the way the first one kind of set it up. It's like the first one like
Mhm.
set up the pitch, and to me this one just kind of like knocked it out the park. You know what I mean? Like it's the same
Right.
way I feel
Ooh.
about
Good
Winter
callback
Soldier.
to like the opening scene,
Yeah. Like I
the
feel like
baseball.
it's the same way I feel about Batman Begins and Captain America: The First Avengers. Like those movies were good movies. Like without those movies, you don't have The Dark Knight, you don't have The Winter Soldier. You need those
Mhm.
movies in order to get to the sequels. That's what makes the sequels good, because you had the first one. So you can't be like, man, this sequel was so good. And it's like, well, the first one, like to me, the first one, I don't really know how I was gonna word it, but the first one is vital to the second one being good. So like I can't ever say like,
Mhm.
man, I love Quiet Place Part Two so much without saying, and I think I liked it so much because the first one was so good. Like it's intrinsically
Mhm.
linked, partially because it's a sequel, but also partially because like the things that were set up in the first one allowed this one to, I feel like, to take it to a different place. So um
Mhm.
yeah, I guess, do you have any final thoughts, or do you have any high, like you kind of discussed a few of your high moments of this movie as we got to talking about it, but I know I
I,
started off kind of like praising it.
I,
You started
I,
off in a different vein.
oh yeah, I think it's interesting. I feel like we started at two very different places, and this is what I love about when you and I really get into something. And it's why I enjoy when we have different feelings, because we always
Yeah.
come into a consensus in the middle of like, I get where you're coming from and you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Love that.
I fully
I
understand it.
think I really enjoyed the opening sequence. I do really
Hmm.
enjoy like the flashback moment. I thought John Krasinski was really strong in the movie, and so even though he had passed away, they found a way for us to have this little moment at the beginning, even though it
Wait, John
doesn't
Krasinski passed
necessarily.
away?
Uh,
What?
no. And at the end of the
I know. I just
oh,
because you said John Krasinski, even though he passed away, I was like,
breaking
that's what
news:
it sounds like.
John
I thought he was
Krasinski
just in
is
a movie this year.
Jim Halpert is dead. No, I thought, even though I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense in like why we needed that flashback scene at the beginning, aside from just showing us this like tense action moment and from having John Krasinski back. I think he's a good actor, and
Yeah.
I liked him in the first movie, and I liked having him again in this movie.
I think that was to introduce, like, I think they wanted to bring Krasinski back, number one,
Mhm.
and again, give us a lot of action at once.
Mhm.
And I think it also was to kind of introduce Emmett, because remember
Yeah,
Emmett was in that scene. But at the
right.
same time, if you remove that scene, I'm not like, hey, who's Emmett? You know what I mean? Like when he's introduced later
Mhm.
in the movie, I think it still works to introduce him there. Just another person that survived. Like you don't really need a whole scene to show his backstory. I think that was more because John Krasinski was like, hey guys, I didn't know I was gonna be in I didn't know I was gonna get a sequel to this. And I killed myself and I kind of want to come back.
Can
Like
we
I
bring
like
you back
acting
real
too. Yeah.
quick?
Let's just oh wait, we can because I'm the director. So what I say goes.
We can do whatever I want.
We do whatever I want. So um and I think it like I don't know if it might have also been like the writers who were like, yeah, we need to bring you back for like a scene, and he might have been like, oh, I don't know, I did kill myself off, and they were probably like, yeah, I know, but we need you to come back.
No,
Um,
you don't understand.
you don't understand. If you want the
We
sequel, you
need
will
you.
be acting in it. Um, so yeah, and I think that scene probably greenlit A Quiet Place Day One because a lot of people liked it. And that's literally what this entire movie is, just like that scene as a whole movie.
Right.
So it'll be, and I feel like I'm interested to see how do they transition from the creatures attacking and killing everything into realizing that they can't see
Mhm.
because they don't really explain that in this scene. Because like they're all quiet when the monster like is outside the door. But I feel like they're doing that just because, like, if you're being hunted, you just kind of go quiet. Like that's kind of like the natural reaction. It's not like
Right.
they know that, like, hey, they hunt by sound. They're just trying to hopefully make the creature think that there's nothing in there so it can keep moving on because it can't see through the doors. So it'll be interesting to see how they figure that out. Because in the trailers, when they're dropping from the skies, just Joseph Quinn's character is telling like um Lupita Nyong'o's character to be quiet. And I'm like, how does he already know? Like
Or
while
is
they're
it just
dropping
like
from
a
this, like I don't know.
or is
Like,
it just like a general like just try to hide in every
yeah.
sense possible?
But like they were in a glass building. So it's
Oh.
like if they were gonna see me, like if I thought they could see, I'm I'm not covered by anything. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's like, I don't know. So it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I haven't seen it yet. Um, but we're probably gonna see it probably in the next week or so. And then we'll be able to review it. So I'm very excited. All right. Thank you
Yeah.
guys for joining us. Leave your thoughts on A Quiet Place Part 2 down below. Are you, one of the people like Ty, OG fans that were kind of disappointed in it? Or were you like the newer fans like me who was like, oh man, I loved it compared to the first one? I was very interested to see if we get that like dichotomy in the comment section and everything. So,
Yeah. Whatever you are, let us know. We want to hear from you.
yep. And until next time, I believe next week we're gonna cover The Acolyte. And then after that, we'll probably get to Quiet Place Day One. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.